I'll be sharing today on Carolyn Elliott's 7 Temptations of a Born Leader. And she says a few qualities, whether to know that you're a born leader, because it's not the same thing as being hired to be a manager and you get paid for it, or if you feel like there's no seat for you at the table, so you create a seat for you with everybody that might want to join you. This is someone who's born this way without necessarily something else at stake, just leadership itself being the nativity. So she says some things are, you might see you have natural gifts, not things that you're trained for. It might start at a young age. She says you have a big vision, and this could be somebody who may not fit in because of this, because the vision is too big for what's available. And third thing is a tender heart. We live in a world now, especially, and she's within our lifetime, Carolyn Elliot, that our lifetimes, God willing, whoever will be seeing this, if it's very much in the future, maybe it will be from the past, but at least for this time period, which is 2023, the Hebrew year 5783, a tender heart is somebody who's able to stay soft in their heart and sensitive without becoming numb. There's so much numbing agents in the food and in the chemicals and in the hyposensitivity because of the light shining in our faces from the cell phones, and because of when people are driving down the street and they're using machines that can kill people, they have to not be afraid of what they're doing constantly, that at any moment it could cause life or death. And also that as you're driving, every second is flashing lights from the traffic lights. And then people go to movies, which is 2 hours of something flashing in your face. And then people play video games, which is like death and rape and other crazy things, and just for the sake of entertainment. And then on top of all that, a lot of people have trust issues because of the people like doctors who have agendas and are getting paid, who are dressed up like they're supposed to help you and then they don't. So the hypersensitivity becomes vigilance and kind of not having someone to watch your back. So when someone's a born leader, and in other words, they have natural gifts, a big vision, and specifically a tender heart, they'll end up with a deep sensitivity to their surroundings, remarkable talents, and a gut-level sense of responsibility for making things much better, not just for the self, but for others. And obviously that takes a belief in oneself. An inner vision of how beautiful life could be when we're confronted with painful external circumstances. So rather than becoming numb as expressed, there's a tender heart that says, it could be beautiful, or I could help everyone, or I feel responsible for it, or these talents are not usual, or I feel sensitive for everything, rather than going numb, or disappearing, or avoiding, or ignorance, forgetful, or distraction. Or exploiting it, seeing how the less, sensitive you are, the more you could kind of control the people who are sensitive by overwhelming them or bombarding them. And finally, a deep fascination with the art of transformation and influence. This is first and foremost a personal practice, and each one individually, because we each have a personality to work with. And then you could see whether you could transform patterns and traits, and this could also be a way to influence others. So now I'll get into it. There's 3 parts she has, and there's part 1, but it's really all just in order. So these are temptations of a born leader. Now that we established what a born leader is, the first temptation is to despair. Government, corporate systems, capitalism, the highly vulnerable mortal body, and subject to the whims of external forces. And the key is to know that the dream is created from consciousness. As we alter and evolve, it alters and evolves the dream. Lucidity in the waking dream is called the I alters all. So altering the I will change everything. If you, let's say, can't see very clear and you think there's always something blurry in the world, but then you put on glasses and you can see clearer, then suddenly it's your sight that changed, then everything changes. So when we hear this non-Jewish word, in Hebrew we call it gilgal, like a wheel, or galgal, it's like a cycle, and it's even to do with cycle of the soul, a recycling. In Vedic tradition they call it samsara, and even in Buddhism, and it's called a wheel of a dream of materiality that spins round and round, filled with beauty and horror. And it's like, ooh, it's kind of like when you're alive and you pay attention, it's stronger than any of these psychedelic mushroom trips, LSD trips, because it spans over the course of a life. You see much more horror and beauty over the course of your life that is difficult to integrate, and that's why people may need to get exposed to horror and beauty through these psychoactive, mind-altering medications, which are often under the category of hallucinogens. And then there's this sense of having to seek the ever-present fire, the enjoyment of everything, and forgive the way God forgives God's self, feeling fulfilling. It's like a union. It could be called hot. because it's an eternal divine yes to all the unfoldings, whether they're terrible or wonderful. And eventually there's like a steam. The steam becomes the apparent reality, appearance reality. It's permeable, it's changing. It's really like a steaminess. It's like a mist, a hot water fire mixture. And it recoagulates as hot total electric enjoyment when this is from temptation to despair. So we see from the darkest depth, the light that bounces out. Now we have temptation to take the self too seriously. A toxic belief is that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing it right. This is a perfectionism, which is actually not a commitment to excellence. It's kind of like a prison cell. It's a shield from the inevitable human humiliation of awkwardness and growth, and kind of like a fear of messiness, embarrassment. This is not really to live in the world and to do it. To do it when excellently is to do it no matter what. It's if something is worth doing, it's worth making a giant fool of myself over and over while doing it. And the willingness to put something imperfect out there is learning, opportunity, momentum. When we get cozy with the sensation of embarrassment, it's how to celebrate. I'm sure everybody's heard about how the baseball player that hit so many home runs started with missing a ball first and then tried again. That's the idea. And it's like the designer that first got rejected, and it's that talk show host that first was fired for and it could be 30, 40, 50 years of somebody living in the world before the fool that they're making of themselves can become something. So this lighthearted approach, being able to say, I don't need to take myself so seriously, is able to come out of the temptation to take ourselves too seriously. And we can focus on that ever-present fire that mentioned in the despair before I move on to the next one, which is temptation to purity, and to basically focus, raise it from what we call is like the genitals to the heart, is this lower part of the spine to the middle of it. So then the top of the head is considered the top part, because the brain actually connects with not the bones we're talking about here, the inner central nervous system. It's called central nervous system, and it goes out into the peripheral nervous system. And it's so precious that we could just look at the way it was designed with a nut. Like the fruit is inside the head, and then the nut is the skull, and there's only holes for where the fruit senses things. And then inside there's like inside of the fruit is like a long skinny bean almost without a shell, and then it's a long bean, and then it has like a bone around it. So we could see that when it's precious, it gets protected. And yet it doesn't. The design is not to be able to lose any mobility, so the vertebrae can move so that this flexible long bean can also get information by being in interaction with the world. So we can actually raise this what we call the fire of life, this hot, living, giving off warmth kind of experience and at least I'm talking to other humans who are mammals. We might not say that every created creation has the same experience, but here for us that have genitals, we can move it up from the pelvis up, which is we could see there's a very strong nervous system body in the genitals because they're so sensitive. That's why people associate it with high pleasure or pain. And if we move that heightened sparkly energy, it's a spark, not sparkly, sparkable energy, the trigger happy energy up to the heart, and we amplify it, then we have a dwelling. Then we can use it to melt any stuck resentment or guilt. In other words, if there's like an ice structure that gives the appearance of something solid, like a material form, in the heart is where we have access to be able to melt it. Moving forward to part 2, she says, this is where we start to go from patriarchal teaching, religious teaching, so the temptation to purity. It's easy to fall prey to the notion that intentions need to be totally pure of selfish motivation, but we can actually take action to make the world a better place and to be better. We don't need to get rid of the basic human drives like sex and power. As just mentioned, it's like a neutral sort of spark-a-bull energy, location, or gravity. And there's this lopsidedly embody the polarity of pure good instead of being whole. Whole is to be both altruistic and selfish, because how could you be altruistic to others if you want them to sacrifice their whole self the way you think you should? So it's possible. It's called tantric and alchemical. Tantric is like the full wholeness of the beauty and horror. It could be both pleasure and pain. To be open is to be open to all, and alchemical is to be able to do that transformative, like influencing it so that it could adjust and become something. co-create almost. So it's possible to simultaneously improve our own freedom, joy, and power while showing others how to do the same. This requires 3 pieces. A, dissolve the attachment to the disempowering beliefs. Like, for example, I should give it away. If it's worth having, I should give it away. Another one is recreate life with our own inner vision. Infinite self inside of us is speaking to us through intuition, dreams, and divination. So this is where we start to remember, from the inside, we could start to adjust on the outside. So this being our real self is pure. It's not that we have to try to cultivate this outside disguise of purity and think it should look pure, but actually be purely us. And the C is communion with other leaders, getting in touch with this dissolve and recreate process as community. So each of the other people that we meet who have been working with self-transformation, self-development, they're like caterpillars becoming butterflies over and over and over and over again. And this is as a community process. And, we could keep becoming renewed in that fire that keeps melting and recreating. Next, we have and I'll stop here and tomorrow we'll continue. I'll do 4, which is temptation to modesty. This is, instead of I wake up every morning feeling I have to prove myself all over again, it allows ourselves to enjoyably acknowledge after initializing our own value and to be highly suspicious of the voice in our head telling us to not feel good about ourselves until we proved ourselves more. And it's, we need to find a way to let our accomplishments warm us and delight us on the inside. That is what fulfillment is. And there's a voice from the illusion of separating us between us and divine fulfillment, that there's something else. And the something else is not it. If there's something else, it's basically creating space for not what is. And that's sort of like not using the current moment to its full potential as a gift or as wholeness. So I'm going to stop here. I will continue with the next 3 temptations of a born leader tomorrow. Be well.